Hello everybody. It is August 19th, 2025 here in the United States of America. And tonight's video, I'm going to keep things a bit brief. This video is being posted pretty late and a long work day and a busy day when I got home with the family. I did want to touch upon something to do with the current meetings that have taken place recently between President Donald Trump and the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and then the meetings that took place after between leaders of EU countries, President Volodymyr Zelensky and President Donald Trump. There were two sets of meetings. The one with President Putin took place first, and then shortly thereafter another meeting took place between representatives from the EU countries. Starmer was there, Macron was there, Maloney was there, the head of the European Commission was there, and then a few others, and then the German Chancellor, forget his name, he's rather unremarkable, and President Zelensky. Now, there seems to be a bit of confusion as to what's actually taking place and what's happening. Why is President Trump seemingly making contradictory statements in regards to one side or the other? On one hand, he's telling Ukraine that they're going to have to concede to territorial, to losing territory to the Russians, telling them that there will be land swaps and they will not be in NATO, which is firmly on the side of Russia, the Russian demands to ending this war. And then also he is making statements about selling more weapons to Ukraine through the Europeans, having direct air support for European peacekeepers, kind of like an Article 5 style security guarantee in regards to Ukraine to prevent further Russian aggression into Ukraine, which again, this is something that the Russians are firmly against. They do not want European troops of any kind within Ukraine. That's just as bad as Ukraine being in NATO. It's essentially the same thing. So why would the Russians acquiesce to that? I think what Trump is trying to do is, and this is my personal opinion on it, I think that he is largely conceded to Russia's position on ending this war as much as he possibly can do politically. And now he's walking a tightrope between the two camps to try, on one hand, look like he's still being tough on the Russians to appease the Europeans and appease the Ukrainians, and then giving enough concessions to the Russians to indicate to the Russians that, yes, he understands the reality of this war, the current reality that is on the battlefield, the current economic reality of the European Union and Russia, and how Russia's economy is still doing just fine while being sanctioned. With the fact that the United States doesn't really have a lot of leverage, if any, over Russia at this point, and that Russia has essentially won this conflict, not as much as the Russian hardliners would like. I know a lot of Russian hardliners are frustrated with the prospect of there being concessions at this point of Russia, of Putin perhaps making a decision to declare a ceasefire, not a ceasefire, but to pledge to not advance any further in Zaporizhia and Kherson if the Donbass is handed over to Ukraine. Now, there's a lot of Russians who want the absolute maximalist position where Ukraine is forced to hand over the remaining oblasts to Russia and to completely concede to Russia's demands and Europe as well. Frankly, I don't see that happening at this point, although I think Russia has clearly won at the end of the day. This so far is looking like a strategic victory for Russia. It is not the all-encompassing, crushing victory that many Russian hardliners wanted. Ukraine, and again, I'm not saying that Russia's position all along wants to take the entire country, but there are many in Russia that feel like if a peace agreement is reached where all of Russia's goals aren't met, then it will essentially be Minsk 3 and the can will be kicked down the road and a conflict will happen in the future. There are some Russian hardliners who feel it's best to completely militarily defeat Ukraine and force the Europeans to acquiesce to Russia's demands, not militarily, but by clearly showing that, well, they're not messing around in Ukraine, and they will tolerate no further threats to their security on their border. But realistically, at this point, if this war is to end soon, Ukrainian nationalists are going to fight to the bitter end. Russia will be forced to fight this war to its military conclusion, and I think Vladimir Putin is trying to avoid that, probably to save Russian lives, although yes, I think Ukrainian casualties far outnumber Russian casualties at this point. Funny enough, I actually finally did see a casualty figure for the Russians that I do think is accurate. It's about 200,000 dead, plus I'm sure maybe another 200,000 to 300,000 wounded, probably more than that. But the same article said the Ukrainian casualties were only 60,000 to 100,000 dead, which I think anyone who's followed this war from the beginning with unbiased perspective would find those numbers to be ludicrous. The Russian number is actually accurate. The Ukrainian number is much, 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 much higher, or they wouldn't be in the position that they're currently in. Now, I believe that, to go back to President Trump, that he has taken the realist position on this war. He has to find a way to essentially give Russia enough of what it wanted where Russia stands down and Putin can present this as a victory to the Russian people, while at the same time showing that to the Europeans that he has not abandoned them. He takes their security seriously, that he is willing to do enough to make them feel comfortable that no further Russian aggression will happen in Eastern Europe. Now, I am under the personal opinion that aggression wouldn't happen anyways. I don't think Russia has any designs to move any further west, but I do believe that Europe is run by a bunch of hysterical fools. There are a few leaders in Russia, or a few leaders in Europe that are realists and rational leaders. Viktor Orban, I think Meloni from Italy is one of them. Sorry, the phone was ringing. And several others, the Slovakian leader, the president of Serbia. But I think other, especially the Germany and the United Kingdom and France, their leaders are hysterical, and I think a lot of this goes back to just old blood feuds in Europe between different European states, between the Russians, the Poles, the French, the English. This stuff is not dead. It's there under the surface. No matter how much Europe tries to pretend like it's worked its way past that, it's finally over its bloody history and is advanced and peaceful and sophisticated. Those things still linger beneath the surface, and I think that a lot of this animosity towards Russia within the Baltic states and Western Europe does stem from that, and I think Trump has to find a way to soothe their worries, to make them feel comfortable with exiting the war. I think many in Europe are still committed to a complete Russian defeat, which I think President Trump knows is aside from actually amassing a million-man NATO army and sending it into Ukraine, is just not going to happen. There's no feasible way to do this. There's no way to turn this situation around militarily. I just think many European leaders haven't quite accepted the embarrassment that will come with that being the reality that they accept. So I think President Trump is trying to keep all parties happy. He wants to give the Russians enough to make them feel comfortable ending the war. He wants to give them enough security guarantees in regards to NATO expansion, in regards to their issues with long-standing issues with NATO expansion, their issues with Ukraine, and their distrust of the West. I think he wants to do enough to placate them and make them happy, but I think he wants them at least to give the Europeans enough enough concessions to also keep them happy. I think Trump is trying to be the middleman as best he can here, because I think he has realized that this is really the only way forward. If he firmly puts himself in the Russian camp, that's very bad for him politically, domestically, and in Europe. And also, if he puts himself firmly in the let's fight Russia camp, that's also very bad for him politically here in the United States as well. So I think it's best that Trump tries to be the neutral peacemaker as best he can and set up some kind of peace arrangement that gives enough concessions to both parties to where the war can be ended and everyone largely saves face. Say, even if Ukraine is forced to hand over the Donbass and what the Russians have taken so far, they can simply say, well, we fought the Russians off, we prevented them from taking the whole country, we've survived, and we stopped them where they were. That's going to be the narrative that they spin, and the Europeans will say the same thing. Putin couldn't advance any further because we defeated him militarily and he begged for peace. That might not be the reality of it, but that's what they can sell to their people. And then in Russia, what Putin will probably sell is, although, yes, the 4 oblasts weren't taken in their entirety, if Ukraine does acquiesce to not joining NATO and declare itself neutral, and then there's some kind of security guarantee in place that's not overly provocative to the Russians, then Putin, again, can sell this as a victory. Large parts of Russian-speaking Ukraine were liberated, according to the Russians. The most military engagements resulted in Russian victories. NATO was faced by the Russian army, or an army completely subsidized by NATO, which is de facto a NATO army anyways, was defeated by the Russians. The Russians stood firm against the West and defeated the West. Much of this goes back to old Cold War animosity, even before that. Sorry, been a little sick lately. So again, like, Putin can also sell this as a victory to his people, which is good for him politically, and I think Trump is trying to facilitate both parties being able to do that and to walk away from this conflict in a way that ensures that no further conflicts happen. But it's hard to see, or hard to say if that's how things will turn out. Anyways, that's all I wanted to talk about tonight. Got a little bit of trouble here talking any longer. I'm getting over it, but still a little, throat's still a little itchy. Anyways, everybody have a great night. Before I go, I think for the time being, I'll probably go back down to 2 videos a week. Reason being, my job is in its busy season until November, so I'll be working 50 hours, maybe more a week, and doing 3 videos along with the family things, family obligations I have, which would be a little difficult for me. But everyone out there, have a great night, and I will see everybody on Saturday. Take care.